Hi there and welcome to the fourth video that is going to be created for the spreadsheet modeling unit. Excuse me. And this one's going to be focusing on planning. Now, I'm not going to do loads and loads and loads of slides for planning because ultimately you guys have already done planning for a number of different units previously. So, you know, you should have, frankly, some idea of the name of the game, really, what we need to be doing for your planning document. And for the spreadsheet, you know, it's going to contain many similar things that your website planning would have included, what your programming planning would have included, what your social media planning would have included. So there shouldn't really be any major surprises here. And you know, ultimately, in the quote-unquote real world, you know, you'd be planning your spreadsheet before you went and created it. You would be making sure that you are clear in your mind as to what your spreadsheet will contain. However, I made a judgment call in terms of that I didn't think that you would find it as easy to do a planning document if you didn't have any experience of actually including things within a spreadsheet itself. You know, it's very difficult to know what to include or what types of things you could include. So I decided to do some examples of formula and functions and various other aspects that you would have covered before we actually look at then going back and being like, okay, so now you know some of the stuff that you could include within a spreadsheet model, so that when you do go and plan it, you'll be able to maybe link them together a little bit better. So, planning your spreadsheet, like I said, it's going to be including a number of different parts, which will be quite familiar for you guys by now. So you're going to need something that says what it does, okay? Something that makes it very explicit about what your spreadsheet model needs to do, how it needs to function. Also things like who is going to use the system, and also how, therefore, are they going to use the system? So are you going to, for example, need to use a user interface? Because that makes it generally a bit easier for some end users to be able to use the user interface, but also a lot of people, and I'm making a sweeping generalization here, but a lot of people, when they open up a spreadsheet, are not as familiar with things like the features and functions of what is within a spreadsheet, and therefore frankly might make errors with it. So, you know, you might and likely will be thinking about things like user interfaces. Also, obviously linked to what I've just said, things like validation are going to be very, very important. You know, you need to be able to make it in such a way so that you will ensure that there is good quality data coming into your spreadsheet as frequently as possible. I mean, you can't 100% ensure that the data that goes into your spreadsheet is accurate, but you can do things like ensuring that data falls within a certain range or is a certain type, and excuse me, maybe they can pick from a list. So, you know, that sort of thing will ensure that, you know, you have a better chance of having good quality data within it. Constraints. A constraint is anything that stops you doing whatever you want. So it's a very common question from students. You get, well, what is a constraint? And it's a bit strange in a way, because actually constraints are not particularly difficult things. It's just maybe thinking a little bit kind of laterally about stuff. So constraints will be basic things like time, cost, experience with the product. There'll be things like complexity, maybe a lack of prior knowledge of the software that you are using. You know, all of that type of stuff will be constraints. Also, you know, in the great wide world, people who will pay you to do this will also be highly irrational. You know, they'll have these grand ideas about what the software should do, and you know, sometimes it's completely unrealistic. So that could be something to consider. You know, there's lots of different constraints that you guys can think about. Maybe quality of machine. I mean, it's not so much of an issue with a spreadsheet model as, if you were creating a website or doing graphic design in the Adobe suite, because those are very resource heavy pieces of software. Excel, or indeed another piece of spreadsheet software, because don't think that Excel is the only piece of spreadsheet software out there, are not really as resource heavy as some of the other items that you might encounter. But that doesn't mean that you can get away with a really kind of substandard machine, especially if your model becomes a lot more complex further down the road, and contains a lot more data further down the road. You may well find that it is a consideration, and those guys who use, frankly, the college laptops, and we all know how good the college laptops are, will find that pretty much any software that you use on the college laptops is going to be harder to use than if you're using a desktop. And I'm not saying that desktops can't be bad quality, but there's a big difference in college. But you will find that you can rinse and repeat that kind of theory for, let's say, for example, if people want to use things like Chromebooks, is going to be an issue. How will the system output data is really important. Okay, there's little point you going through this whole process, this rigmarole of creating these spreadsheet models, if you're not going to do anything with them. If you're, there's very few people out there that really kind of will do these things just for the hell of it. But pretty much all of them want something from it. So what type of output are you going to get? And you may find that you want multiple different outputs. So you may find that you want graphs, for example. You may find that you want to be able to export the contents as a CSV file for use in another piece of software, database, for example. You may find that you want to be able to export it to something like a Word file or a PowerPoint file, so that you're able to display the outputs or results that you get from the spreadsheet in a way which is more user friendly. Or maybe you're going to present them to bigwigs, at some point, or so how you will output the data is going to be really important. Of course, the one that I didn't say there is if you're going to print it, because people still print these things quite a lot, especially if you are, and I'm going to make a sweeping stereotype, but unfortunately the stereotype exists because it's true. Generally, people who are a bit older will prefer to have paper versions of stuff, whereas guys who are brought up with electronic stuff will tend to be relatively satisfied with a projection on the side of a board or an email. But of course, both of those are outputs. All of those are outputs. If you're going to project something on the side of a wall, you still have to ensure that you are outputting it in a suitable format for that. The actual spreadsheet itself. If I switch back to the spreadsheet here, if I flung this up on the wall, there's too much data on there for something like that. People would be overwhelmed with such an amount of data, and this is a relatively small spreadsheet. Okay, in a lot of businesses, spreadsheets are much larger than this one. So design, first thing, right? So this is going to be probably the biggest change between what you've done between this and programming and so on. So you need to design your spreadsheet, and so what you're going to need to do is have a mock-up, maybe mock-up's the wrong word, but a design where you are planning which functions and formula go in which bit of your spreadsheet. And you can either do this by hand, which is an incredibly laborious process. I can't begin to imagine how long it would take you if you're sitting there with a ruler drawing out your spreadsheet design. or we can do this straight up in Excel, which is the way which I'll be relatively content with, to be honest. Because like I said, the idea of people sitting there with a ruler drawing out all these individual cells is pretty horrendous. But you do need to plan. It's. I mean, I guess you could do it in a Word document as well, potentially. But I mean, my kind of outlook with it is that if you're having to sit there drawing all these cells out, then you may as well do straight into a ready-made grid, which of course is what you find in Excel. But what you need to make sure that you're doing when you are designing this is you are putting the formula in the cells. Now, I know you might come back and say, well, Mike, that's what you do anyway. But actually what gets displayed is the result of that formula, whereas what needs to be displayed is the formula itself in your plan. And Excel lets us do that by, if we go, I'll go into my Excel. Easy for me to show it in here. So you probably have home selected right now. If you click on formulas, and then there's a little button that'll do up here that says show formula. At the minute, all I have in here is the result of all these different formula that I have done. I mean, you can see the formula in the formula bar, but actually what I want will be the formula to be actually displayed. So if I click on show formulas, you can see that the way it looks changes, and any cell that now has a formula in it, you can actually see the formula within it. So if you're doing a design, you would take all of these out, okay, and in theory you would start it off on maybe quite a small scale, and you would just have where all the formulas are in here. And actually, I mean, this gives us quite a good visual about all of the different types of formula that we've used. If you look at this, you've got addition, VLOOKUP, subtraction, multiplication. Now, while this is another multiplication, it uses an absolute cell reference, so that makes it a little bit different. Then you've got another subtraction here, then you've got sum, average, max, min. So that's quite a bit there. Of course, what it won't do is show things like your validation. So you're going to have to highlight that elsewhere. Okay, you're going to have to physically describe that and say, all right, this is where my validation is going to go, and this is what it's going to be. All right, you will need to include one of these for every sheet that you're going to do. Otherwise, it's not a full design. You can't just have one sheet. You have this page here, this overall profit and loss, okay, which is completely different from the other pages. All right, so we need to have all of these different sheets being displayed within your plan. And I said you can't show everything, right? Because you can't show this validation. You're going to actually have to physically say that underneath. And you can do this in the Word document. You're going to put all of your design stuff in one great big document. And you may well, after however you transfer this across, you can probably copy and paste some of it across. Of course, it's very wide, so you may well find that you need more than one screen grab to ensure that it fits on a side of A4. I mean, you could turn it landscape. It doesn't particularly matter if you turn it landscape or not, as long as it's visible. So you can include screen grabs, and I mean, I would include screen grabs, to be honest, because if you just copy and paste, there's actually nothing that will tell me that you have done it in Excel and not just written it in Word. I mean, it would be really odd to just write it straight into Word. But I do think the screen grabs would probably be easier, to be honest with you. You're going to need to tell me where you put graphs. I mean, this was from the previous video that I did, and you may well decide to have a dedicated sheet for your graphs. In fact, to be honest with you, I'd probably say that's the wisest call. So you would need to actually say where that's going to be and what graphs you would include. Formatting, you'll need to tell me that. So if you're thinking about your design document you did for your website, okay, this is not amazingly similar to that. So if you think about the website, you would need to highlight what goes where in the website. You'll need to talk about how it's going to be formatted. You'd need to talk about what content is going to be there. You would potentially think about how you would style it in the CSS, things like widths, height. I mean, you're obviously not going to need to tell me width and height, but you know, it's not amazingly dissimilar. It is ultimately design, and the goal with designs is that you undertake them so that they mean that you have to do less work longer term. Because what you don't want to do is, I mean, with this spreadsheet, right, it's one that I've used many times with. I mean, I've changed over the years the games that are here, but basically this is a type of setup that I've used many times. So I'm very familiar with where all these different formula go. If you guys had to set this up, it would likely take you hours and hours to do. And I don't mean that to sound disrespectful, I'm just saying that because you would have to do it from scratch. And you'd need to work out, okay, so we need to have all these different formula, how are we going to go about doing that? And what you don't want to do is spend 4 or 5 hours, maybe more, whatever, doing it, and then all of a sudden realise that you've missed something out and you have to do it all over again. The idea is that you do the plan first, and you make sure the plan is right, and then you start making it, which is the same with any design, really. And also you'd have the opportunity to run it by people, whoever's paying you to make the spreadsheet model, or whatever thing you are designing. So within your design document, you are going to need to design or include your design for every one of these. Now, you probably don't need, I say probably, I mean basically what you would have in here, you wouldn't have all the data. Okay, so you would you could probably get away with getting rid of all of this and just having filler like game. Okay, and then you would have whatever grade, and then you might have, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, 40, right? Because the idea is you're just putting filler stuff in there because it's design, right? And you know, you can get away with just having the one row there. Would be fine. And obviously the same for the other sheets. Now I've given you pre-populated data because if I asked you guys to do it, to populate the data, it literally would take you like 2 weeks to do, based on observation of students doing this in the past. It's easier for me just to give you the data. And also what I would get is students that would sit here. So I think I've got 28. Yeah, so I've got 28 games there, and a load of them made up, and a load of them are a little bit silly. But if I asked you guys to put 20 games in there, what I would get are students sitting there going, what games can I choose that will make me look cool or whatever? And actually it doesn't really matter. It's just, you know, filler stuff really, so that we can design this spreadsheet model so that you can demonstrate that you are able to use a range of features and formula and create this model for a fictitious scenario. And hell, it's got to be more interesting than the cheesemaker, right? I would hope. Okay, so what else have we got here? How sheets could be linked together, you will need that. Formatting, you need to mention that. I mean, what I would suggest to you guys, if you are a bit so-so about, are you unsure about whether you'll need to include it or not, my suggestion to you is include it, and if the worst comes to the worst, I won't need it. Whereas if you don't include it, and I do need it, then it's not going to be there. In which case that will be sad times. You will also need to create a blank I say blank as in you'll have you'll create a testing plan. Now you guys, I'm sure, have created testing plans across varying units so far. You'll need to create a testing plan, and I've done a previous video on it, and I'm going to put that into your area. And so I'm not going to cover it in this one in huge depth, but basically you need your testing plan. Test plan should cover all areas of your spreadsheet. Okay, so it should be nice and concise. So what I'm not looking for is something that goes along the lines of do or formula work. You're looking for, it's so vague. You've got like 10 plus formula functions in there. You need to be quite specific. Okay, test specific things within it. And don't forget, you can always do the data you're testing it on. So you could test what happens if you put data that is expected in. You could put what happens if you put data that is wildly inaccurate in there. What happens if you leave the sheet blank? You've got lots of different tests that you could potentially run on everything. Okay, but the key thing is you need to be specific with it. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go into too much depth on that because you can see the other video which is dedicated to testing plans. And 15, I think, should be sufficient. You've got quite a big, I say big, you've got a reasonable sized spreadsheet that's got lots of formulas within it. It's got things like charts, it's got macros, it's got splash screens, it's got pages linked together, it's got a whole range of different stuff that you can potentially test. I don't think 15 is particularly too many. What I would say is that for the web unit, I did end up referring a few people who, for some reason that I cannot fathom, did not put their test plan in a table. You need to put your test plan in a table. I'm happy enough for your evidence to be underneath your table, so maybe if you have a nice big screen grab you can label them so they correspond with your test. I'm happy enough for that. Not all tutors will be happy with that, but I'm relatively happy with it as long as the evidence exists. However, your test plan should be in a tabular format, again as per the video that I will include within your Teams page. So I do believe that you should be getting onto this by the end of Thursday, and certainly if not by the end of Thursday, then by the time that we get back after half terms. Obviously, I've created this for a very specific group, but maybe you might be looking at it further down the line, in which case you can ignore this comment. But ultimately things like planning is still going to be very important, no matter who is viewing this. Okay, well, I'm going to leave it here, and thank you for listening, and hopefully it has been useful, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.